Hi, welcome to another episode of U.S. History with Lennox, and today America is at war. In April of 1917, President Woodrow Wilson asked the American Congress for a declaration of war against Germany and the Central Powers. The provocation? The unrestricted submarine warfare of the German U-boats, the interception of the Zimmerman telegram, and the sinking of American ships that were sailing under a neutral flag. But declaring war is the easy part. Preparing our soldiers and getting over there is tough, and then what we do here at home is just as important. So let's look at America's involvement in World War I. Our fighting force was known as the American Expeditionary Force, and they were led by John Pershing, the general of the armies. He will lead 1 million troops into Europe, and we will see over 100,000 men die both in combat and in non-combat situations. But getting over there was tough. See, when we first declared war, we only had about 110,000 men in the military. So we had to institute a draft, and in 1917, Congress passed the Selective Service Act, which would require all men between the ages of 18 and 45 to register for a draft. Once that was done, the draft was started. 2 million men were drafted into the military, and that's along with 2 million men who volunteered. Part of that group of men included 400,000 African Americans. They are going to be the source of one of the fiercest fighting forces over in Europe, the Harlem Hellfighters, but more on that later. Women are also going to serve a very important role in this war. They'll not only serve in the military and non-combat roles such as secretaries and nurses and operators, but they're also going to be the labor force here at home. Our soldiers will be known as doughboys, and their young, fresh faces will head over to Europe to save the world for democracy. As I mentioned, African Americans did serve in World War I, but they were restricted primarily to non-combat roles, which was not what they expected at all. When they volunteered or when they were drafted and they got on those ships and they landed over in France, they fully expected to be trained in combat. But instead, they were used as stevedores in the supply units. They were the ones responsible for loading the trains and the ships that were getting everything to our men on the front. It's not that they didn't want to fight. They just weren't allowed to. But they kept fighting for that right to be part of the combat force in Europe. And as I mentioned before, one unit was successful. The 369th Infantry Regiment, known as the Harlem Hellfighters, probably one of the most decorated and celebrated African American units in American history. They do such an incredible job fighting. They are going to be awarded the French Croix de Guerre, which is one of the highest honors of the French government. But we were all fighting for the same reason. That reason that Wilson told us in his war message. We were all fighting for democracy. And that's going to lead to a lot of propaganda here in the United States. We had to sell the Americans on this war to get them fully behind it. So we started this propaganda campaign aimed at getting American support for the war. It included recruitment of soldiers, sailors, and nurses, financing the war because we have to pay for this. We needed Americans to conserve the resources they had so we could have them for our soldiers fighting in Europe. And finally, we needed to dehumanize the enemy. And this is going to be tough because remember, we have a lot of German Americans living here in our country who are already being attacked just because they're German. These posters were used to attract men to volunteer. Yes, we had the draft, but volunteers are needed as well. Different units tried to attract men to come and serve with them. We even used sex appeal to get men to join. We were even looking to get dogs involved in the war. Yes, that's right, I said dogs. It wasn't uncommon for people to volunteer their dogs to go serve in the war, knowing that they probably would never see their pet again. Can you imagine Americans being asked to do that today? And then, of course, we were trying to attract women into serve as well, whether it be for nursing or in the American Red Cross or to just do something for the boys fighting overseas. Women's role in the war is going to finally lead to the passage of the 19th Amendment, giving them the right to vote. Once the government sees how involved women were, they're going to be rewarded with the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1919. We needed money to finance the war. The way we did that was through bonds. Bonds are like loans that we give to the American government, which they will pay back to us over time with interest. This is how we helped pay for this war. We also asked Americans to conserve food and other resources here in America so that they could be used for our soldiers fighting overseas. Americans were told, don't waste food. Sign your country's pledge to save food. It was seen as un-American to eat large quantities of meat. That's all we do now, but in 1918, Americans were asked to stop. And no bread either. Americans were given options. Eat more cottage cheese. Save the meat for the boys fighting. Plant a victory garden. Grow your own vegetables so vegetables that our farmers are growing can be sent to our boys overseas. Sheep clubs were started throughout the country. Everyone was helping to raise a sheep because, as it says in the poster right there at the top, 20 sheep could equip and clothe a soldier. In fact, even the president raised sheep right there on the White House lawn. Finally, we wanted to dehumanize the enemy. If we make the enemy something that we can't even see as human, it's going to make our task that much easier when it comes time to fight them. And so the term Hun is going to be used to destroy these evil Germans that we're fighting against, or so the posters said. Typically, we were seen as the American hero going in and saving those who could not protect themselves. War agencies were created to make all of this happen. The War Industries Board was created to coordinate the purchase and allocation of war materials to make sure our fighting force overseas got everything they need. The National War Labor Board had a very important job. Their job was to keep America working, to prevent any strikes from taking place that would slow down the progress of getting things overseas. Their key phrase was, "Labor will win this war." Women and African Americans played a vital role here at home. They took over the positions that the fighting men had left, so they kept America working throughout the years that we were in this war. And finally, the Food Administration was organized to set up rationing for foods, as well as encourage Americans to grow those victory gardens. We also needed to get our messaging on cue. We needed to make sure that Americans never lost faith in this fight we were fighting. The Committee on Public Information was responsible for a lot of these propaganda posters that I've been showing. George Creel and the Creel Committee headed up this committee, and their sole purpose was to promote patriotic duty during the war. They did it using those propaganda posters and advertising. They used movies to advertise it as well, and they also used what was known as 4-minute men. These are men who would travel and speak in public for 4 minutes at a time, encouraging Americans to continue to ration, to continue to grow victory gardens, to continue supporting the war effort. I love this picture down on the bottom right. This is shortly after America declared war in New York City, and people came together in huge crowds to hear people speak. Two very famous people are in this picture right on that ledge there. Standing there holding up a man on his shoulders is Douglas Fairbanks, one of the most famous actors at the time. And if you look closely, the man he's holding on his shoulders is none other than Charlie Chaplin, probably the biggest star of the early 1900s. It was incredibly important for the Committee of Public Information to get pictures like that and to get these people behind the war effort, because then Americans would follow them as well. We didn't always have good communication, though. As I mentioned in an earlier video, we actually passed laws against anti-war speech and other activities that undermined what we were trying to do. The Espionage and Sedition Acts passed in 1917 and 1918 made it illegal for anyone to talk negatively about the war effort, about our country, or about our government. One man who did that, Eugene Debs, is actually going to be jailed for speaking out against the draft in 1919. What's fascinating is he is actually going to run for president from jail in the election of 1920. The war is going to come to an end in 1918. Now, America had not fought very long. In fact, we hadn't really gotten any American boots on the ground until about 10 months after we had declared war. So we weren't there very long. But our influence and our impact was huge. It tilted the scales into the favor of the Allies, which is going to allow us to defeat Germany. And Germany will surrender and agree to sign an armistice in November of 1918. The armistice is going to be signed on November 11th at the 11th hour, so at 11 a.m. So 11/11 at 11 a.m. This is why we celebrate Veterans Day on November 11th every year as a remembrance to those men who fought in the war. Now, the war was over, but another fight was about to begin, and that's going to be the Treaty of Versailles and what is going to come of that. But we'll talk about that in another lecture. If you have any questions, you can always post them down in the comments below. Otherwise, if you saw something you like, give me a little subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.